Hey folks, today's video is part 2, a continuation of last week's video where I showed you the install of a Viega water manifold system here on my Jayco Pinnacle fifth wheel. Specifically, I featured their MiniBloc system, and then I also featured a kind of a plumbing cleanup project, if you will. So definitely check out that video if you haven't already, but basically I ran out of time and there was some more things that I wanted to communicate. And so in today's part 2 video, I'm going to start out with an objection that I think some might have, perhaps RV manufacturers, maybe RV service techs with a plumbing project like you've seen here. And then I also want to touch on 3 important considerations if you're thinking about doing a water manifold system on your RV. And then last, I want to hit the pros and cons of a water manifold system, specifically in the context of an RV, because it's not all positives, it's not all win-win. So with that, let me start with that main objection. And that is when you're doing a project like this, where you're trying to clean things up and make things look a little bit neater, naturally you are adding to the length of your plumbing lines and potentially adding more fittings. And so some may say, well, you're adding more length to your plumbing, more fittings, that's more things to go wrong, more points of failure. So let me just talk about the length, because yes, there are some additional length here, just like you saw on the freshwater line, as opposed to taking, the shortest path, the path of least resistance here. And so yes, I would say per line, maybe I added 2, 3, maybe 4 feet on average to the length of the plumbing. So pretty marginal really when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. And then as far as the fittings go, that's another objection I think people could have when you're doing something like this. But let me point out that I tried really hard not to add too many fittings. And you can see that's why all these lines curve upward and bend gradually, as opposed to doing a hard 90-degree angle up and then another hard 90-degree angle over here. And so I tried to minimize the number of fittings. In fact, if you've been paying attention here, let me show you a close-up. But check out here how I did a lot of the 90-degree turns. Notice how there is not a fitting here. So this is actually just a PEX support, basically a bend support, and it allows you to make a 90-degree turn safely with PEX without having it, kink up. And so basically that metal support there goes on the inside and outside of the pipe and helps you make a 90-degree turn. So I tried to make use of those as much as possible so that there's not an additional fitting. In other words, there's a continuous run of pipe going down all the way to that exit point there, all the way really back to the Nautilus panel in the case of that fresh water fill there. And so I tried to do that throughout and make use of bends and gradual turns and stuff so that I wouldn't have so many extra fittings incorporated in. If I had to guess on average with each zone here, each line, maybe I added on average maybe 3 or 4 extra fittings, especially if you factor in those ball valves in the bathroom there. But really overall, I don't think there's that many more fittings factored in here. And in my experience personally, these crimp rings, these stainless steel rings here, these are extremely reliable. I have done probably 1,000 of these or so in my lifetime. I'm not a plumber or anything, but I do a lot of projects that involve these, and I have yet to see one of these fail. When they're installed properly, I have yet to see one of these fail. That's in my experience. Like I said, I'm not a plumber. Whereas other fittings that I've worked with, sometimes once in a while after you test them the first time, maybe there's a little bit of a drip here or there, but these seem to be very robust, very reliable. And so, adding maybe 3 or 4 extra fittings per line, I'm okay with that compared to the benefit of having everything look so neat and freeing up all that extra space. Well, anyway, I did want to address that one objection that I thought some might have, but let me talk about 3 other considerations here, and then we'll do pros and cons for a water manifold system. The first consideration is, this being an RV, we do want to think about winterization. Now, I don't personally winterize my RV because we use it oftentimes year-round and it doesn't get that cold in Georgia, but I still wanted to think about that. So I did keep the existing low point drains in place. Those are the blue and the red down here. You'll notice coming off off of the water manifold system. Down below here is the cold supply, and then it carries on and continues to this blue line that runs behind the BM Pro panel, and then out here to the campsite it drops down, and there's a valve right there. So that blue, the cold water line, is a true low point drain. I mean, this would drain by gravity alone, because if you think about it, all the cold water lines are coming up here, so they're all going to naturally drain down here and go through that low point. However, on the hot side, it's a little more complicated because this is a smaller MiniBloc water manifold system and not their larger ManaBloc system. All the lines are off to this one side. You know, if you had a full ManaBloc system, there's going to be two columns where the cold's on one side, the hot's on the other. And so then you've got at the bottom here supply, or basically an aux for the cold and the hot. But my cold's on the bottom here, my hot's on the top, and that's it. And so for the hot, I did keep the low point drain connected to that supply, but technically there's going to be a little bit of a bottleneck up in this area right here, where the water's not going to really truly completely drain by gravity alone, because it's going to first got to go up here to the supply and then back down to this low point. So I just point that out as I did provision the low point. You're obviously going to have to, if I was to winterize this, I'd have to use compressed air and blow out my hot lines, which, you know, most people do anyway. But I did still keep that hot low point drain, and that goes to the same place as the cold out there with the valve on it. So that's one consideration just to think about, one kind of slight nuance when you're using a MiniBloc system like this, where it has the supplies on opposing ends there. The second consideration I want to talk about with a project like this, where you're adding additional links to your plumbing, you know, additional fittings, things that could fail, is leak detection or leak awareness. And that's what this is down here. This is a little leak detector that is from Govee, and I'll put a link to this one in the description below. But this one is actually hooked up to a gateway that's connected to the internet. So not only will this audibly sound an alarm if it detects water here, you can see the little contacts, the sensors on the bottom, but it will also alert me on my phone. And that's whether I'm, you know, here with the RV or, you know, somewhere else out in the world. As long as the RV is connected to internet, then that gateway will alert me. And so I think that's really important, because we are technically adding a lot more different fittings. And, you know, you start thinking about all these water lines up here, or something were to fail, and then look, there's some expensive electronics. I mean, you've got the main surge protector here, you've got this, the J command. I mean, who knows how expensive this part would be to replace, but I mean, this is all in the same space with all the different water lines. And so for me, I really want to know if something is leaking, especially if it's a slow leak, you know, something you don't hear while you're inside the RV. I want to know. And so I put one leak detector down here, and then a second one directly below the water manifold system. And I think that's a real logical spot, because if anything is dripping with these valves or failing right here, that's going to pick it up pretty quickly. And I actually tested these, and they pick up very fast. I mean, I got an alert, an audible alert within a second, and then maybe 2 or 3 seconds later an alert on my phone. So it's pretty quick. So I definitely would recommend doing just some proactive, you know, leak detection, just because there's so many expensive things that are electrical down here, just to be on the safe side. And then third consideration is, you know, I mentioned this J command, the BM Pro node that's right here. This is probably by far the most expensive component that's all in this mechanical space here. And so I've often wondered, this was even before I tackled this plumbing project, I often wondered, what can I do to protect this BM Pro node? Because I mean, there are so many water lines and fittings, and then you've got the Nautilus panel back there, all your fresh water comes in from the city to your RV here. I mean, even just a little stream of a spray could reach out here, and I don't think it would take much water to knock this guy out. So I've often wondered, what could I do to protect this panel? And I kind of in my mind imagined an inexpensive plastic cover, or something that would give this room to breathe. You know, we don't want to seal it up or put a blanket over or something, but give this thing room to breathe, where you can still see everything clearly, but maybe buy you a little extra time if you did have a leak and something was showering down on it, that would at least act like an umbrella of sorts. So I've been thinking on this for a while, and recently I had the idea to buy a paint tray liner. If you can imagine a big 18-inch paint roller, you know, not the standard 9-inch ones that most homeowners use, but the professionals use these 18-inch paint rollers that are 18 inches across, and they have these, you know, buckets and pans and trays that they roll out that 18-inch paint roller in. And so I thought, what if I got a clear liner that lines one of those trays? It just so happens to be about the size here of the BM Pro Note and the way it's mounted. So here's kind of what I'm thinking. I bought one of these. This was only about $5 or $6. But notice how it's kind of like an umbrella. I mean, it doesn't go over the full back, but I mean, on the back, it's just plywood right here. Most of it, the vulnerable stuff's on the front. But, you know, if water was to shower down from above, at least it would hit this clear cover and then kind of roll off the edges with gravity. And so this is kind of what I'm going to try doing. I'm not sure how I'm going to mount this thing to make it so it's not flopping, you know, while I'm in transit. I want it to be easily removable if I need to get to something. But I think this is a cheap way of adding just a little bit of insurance and protecting the BM Pro Note. So I'll put a link to this paint liner in the description below if you're interested in ordering this exact same one. All right, well, let's shift to talking about the pros and cons of adding a water manifold system like this, or even buying an RV that where the brand, you know, already has a water manifold system as standard equipment. So let's talk about pros first. I mean, the obvious one is, first off, if you do have a problem with one specific fixture in your RV and, you know, you're out camping, maybe you're somewhere a little bit more remote, or you just don't have time to fix the problem, then you can easily go in here and shut off that particular fixture. So I mean, I think that's the big selling point. That's what the RV manufacturers that incorporate these already from the factory, that's what they're pushing and selling to you. So I think that's the real big selling point. I think it's probably easier to service your RV in general if you have one of these water manifold systems, just because everything is clear. I mean, I've added labels not just to the water manifold, but of course the lines too that you probably saw throughout the video. But I just think this makes everything a lot cleaner, a lot easier to service and identify, you know, where things are. Then I definitely think there's you know, let's just call it the cool factor. I mean, when you see a water manifold system, especially in an RV that's already built, there is kind of a cool factor to it. I mean, it's kind of like, wow, that looks really neat and really cool to have the ability to control, you know, each individual fixture, kind of like a circuit breaker. So I think that's definitely a pro there. And then I think it's potentially a lot neater. I mean, like I said at the beginning of this video, when I did all this in my mind, I envisioned everything looking even neater than it does already right here. But if you look at the before and after, I mean, it is obviously neater now than it was before. And I do think a water manifold system helps contribute to that. It's not that alone that makes it look neater, but it does help contribute to that. And one thing I would do differently, speaking on that note, is, you know, you can see I've got the water manifold system kind of back in here, a good 16 inches of reach. And so I think if I was doing this all over again, one small change that I would make, I think I would try to bring that water manifold actually forward where it's right about right here. Now this is a little access panel that Jayco gave me from the factory. It was originally screwed and then I just put it on a slide. But I'm just thinking if the water manifold system was right here, you know, flush with this service door, whether it's on a slide or not, I would then put a cutout perhaps in this service panel that's cut out just big enough to gain access to the labels and the valves on the water manifold. And then it would be right here looking really neat. And I've seen this in some other fifth wheels, Crosswood, Redwood fifth wheel. They tend to always put their water manifold system, they actually use this same brand, just a double one with 2 columns, but they tend to put it in their storage bay where just that part is accessible, and they kind of do hard 90s with the water lines. And so that way it looks really neat. It's kind of like a circuit breaker panel. I think that is one change that I would do moving forward. So if you've got a Pinnacle like me, or you've got an RV with a service panel, I would just take advantage of that. Use that service panel, make a cutout in it for the water manifold system, and that way too, if you need access to it or to service it, you know, you're not just cutting a hole in a static panel. You've got something that you could easily remove like this, whether it's on a slide or it's screwed in. So that is one change that I would make, just to make it look a little bit neater, you know, kind of show it off, and of course make it a little bit easier to reach. Now I'm going to shift to talking about the cons of a water manifold system, and the first one that I'm going to mention is a pretty big con, one that I don't think people realize when it comes to water manifold systems, and manufacturers that put these in, RV manufacturers, definitely don't mention this. And that is, it has to do with when you're dry camping, you know, maybe you don't have a freshwater hookup and you're using using your freshwater tank, or maybe you're at a state park where you have fresh water in your RV, a hookup outside from the city, but you don't have a sewer. And so you're being conservative with your water use naturally because you don't want to fill up your tanks, right? Your gray tank or your black tank. And so one of the cons with having a water manifold system is specifically with the hot water. If you think about it, in your RV, let's say that you're in your bathroom and you turn on the hot water in your vanity, in your sink. Well, in a conventional RV without a water manifold system, everything's just kind of teed off of that hot water line. And so if you bring the hot water all the way to your vanity sink, chances are where it tees off to the shower is not going to be much further along. And so that hot water has already traveled all the way through the line. It's at your vanity, and now it only has to go a little bit further to your shower. But if you've got a water manifold system in your RV that has individual outlets for every single fixture, I did more of a zone system here, but imagine if you had one for your shower, one for your vanity sink, another one for the bidet on your toilet, then every time you're calling for hot water, that hot water has to travel all the way from the start point to the finish point. Compare that to a conventional system that does not have a water manifold system. That hot water has already traveled along and it's pretty close to where you are in the bathroom by zone, and so it only has to go a little bit further. So the point is, you're going to have to wait a lot longer to get that hot water to each individual fixture, as opposed to if you did not have a water manifold system. And so that was kind of one of the reasons why I chose to do a zone system here that only has 7 ports, as opposed to a full-fledged system with, maybe 14 ports, because then I'd have to wait for water, especially in the bathroom. I think that's where it makes the most sense. If I'm using the vanity and I'm turning on that hot water, I don't want to waste so much water if I'm taking a shower right after or using the bidet or something else, right? I want that hot water to travel there pretty quickly for conservation reasons. So that's a big con of having a water manifold system, is that hot water is going to take a lot longer to get to each individual unit because there's home runs, there's individual lines running to each one of those. So there's a lot more distance for that water to travel. All right, so a huge con that a lot of people I don't think about when it comes to these water manifold systems. Second con is if you have an all-in-one water manifold system, a turnkey water manifold where everything is all connected and from the same manufacturer, chances are it's probably got a lot of proprietary parts, and that is the case with this one here from Viega. The whole water manifold, they ship this as a system. And so even these connectors here, these threaded connectors that connect the 1/2-inch PEX to the water manifold, even these are proprietary. These are not some kind of standard 1/2-inch threaded connection that you can get, at your local home center. So if this ever were to fail, there's an O-ring inside of here, I couldn't just go to my local home center and get a replacement. Same thing goes up here on the supply, what feeds it up here. These are all proprietary. These are not standard threads. So my point being is, if something were to fail on the water manifold specifically right here, getting parts could be a little bit of a challenge, in a timely fashion. You might have a plumbing, outlet in a city that has Viega parts in stock, but chances are, I think you're going to have to buy that kind of stuff online. Might take several days for those things to get to you. And so if you were to have a failure with your water manifold system, you might be kind of stranded and without water. So my solution to that is I'm going to make up a real inexpensive, basically like a static PEX manifold that's all made out of PEX pipe and just standard PEX, T's and elbows, that basically would allow me, if this ever failed, catastrophically, I could then real quickly take these 3 hot lines and connect them to a pre-made, PEX static manifold, and same thing for the cold. So that's kind of my solution here. Just have a backup plan. It's probably going to cost me, $20-30 to make something like that out of PEX, but that's my plan in the event that something were to fail there. And then of course, last con, like I mentioned before, is that when you do a water manifold system like this, you are potentially adding to the linear, the pipe that's in your RV, more fittings like I talked about before. But for me, having the neatness here, taking advantage of bends and curves instead of, a 90-degree elbows, I think all that can be mitigated, and really I think it's worth it in the end. All right, guys, well, those are the pros and cons that I wanted to mention with a water manifold system. But do me a favor, let me know in the comments below, what do you think about having a water manifold system in your RV? Is it a must-have? Is it a nice-to-have feature? Or is it something that, in your opinion, really isn't worth the extra risk or maybe something failing in there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I mean, for me personally, I think it is nice to have a zone system like I did here, where you don't literally have an individual outlet for every single fixture, but you've got some split up so that if you did have a problem, you can shut them off. I think this addresses the concerns with hot water traveling to individual fixtures because I've zoned it out as opposed to doing each individual fixture. So for me, I think I wouldn't mind having one with a zone system like this. I don't think I'd be as big on an RV brand that has, 14 different ports feeding each individual fixture in the RV. I'd really rather see, individual shutoffs closer to those specific fixtures, and that addresses the problem for, service. But again, let me know what you think in the comments below. I mean, if there's a brand of RV that you'd like to see add one of these into their RVs, then drop their name in the comments below. Well, anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. I know for me personally, I did accomplish my goal in the end of freeing up some space back here. I mean, I've got a ton of space back here behind the BM Pro panel, and then I freed up that space down here, which, like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is where I'm going to install a very specific device that will solve a very specific problem for RVers. And so if you're not already subscribed to the channel, definitely hit that subscribe button because I think you'll find it really helpful for what I'm going to install back here. It really solves a big problem for RVers. So I'm going to actually install that next and then do some testing on it for a couple weeks, and then I'll come back and do a reveal video and explain and do a review on what that specific product is there. So again, hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed, and as always, thanks for watching.